has always presented itself as developing and caring for the land, from the early days of its settler colonial project to its current image of promoting green initiatives and 3D printed vegan meats. But this is a classic case of greenwashing, trying to appear eco-friendly in order to cover up atrocities. In reality, Israel has and continues to cause immense ecological damage to Palestinian land, as well as accelerating climate change globally. The Jewish National Fund's work is a prime example of this. The JNF is actually the organization that created a few of the propaganda posters that we looked at in our previous video on Zionism's settler colonial attitudes towards land. For many years, the JNF has planted pine trees on top of depopulated Palestinian villages in order to conceal the dispossession that took place there and to prevent refugees from returning. The JNF's work began before the Nakba in the early 1900s in purchasing land with the British Mandate government's support for Jewish use only, with the intention of displacing the Palestinians who lived there. But after 1948, its activities sped up rapidly. As Israel destroyed over 500 Palestinian villages, the JNF seized more than 70% of Palestinian land and began to plant pine trees over this land. Today, the number of pine trees that the JNF has planted over Palestinian villages that Israel has destroyed since the early 20th century is now 250 million pine trees. These non-indigenous trees were not suitable for the Palestinian environment and killed off many other native plants within their vicinity. As a result, the JNF made Palestine's natural environment highly vulnerable to ecocide and habitat destruction. The pine trees killed off nearly all surrounding flora with their high acidity level and increased risk of forest fires. So, in light of this understanding of Zionism's relationship to the land, and the way that it has caused immense ecological violence, how can we understand the experience of Palestinians as a kind of ecological violence? And how does this help us understand the centrality of land to Palestinian freedom? First, what do we mean by ecology? We can think of ecology as the sum of all life, how humans and non-humans interact with each other and create systems in a delicate symbiotic balance. So when we say ecological violence in Palestine, we don't only mean harm inflicted on the land, but how this impacts non-human life and how this impacts Palestinians and their relationship to the land. Usually, when people talk about the condition of Palestinians, they talk about how Palestinians are fragmented from one another due to the denial of right of return, due to apartheid policies and checkpoints, and so much more. And this fragmentation is intentional by Israel because it denies Palestinians the ability to exist and resist as a collective. But when we talk about Zionist ecological violence, it reminds us that the violence is not only the fragmentation of Palestinians from one another, but also the fragmentation of Palestinians from their land, disrupting that ecological collective. For example, Israel restricts the ability of Palestinian fishermen in Gaza to access good quality and quantities of fish by limiting the amount of miles they can travel into the sea and by restricting their access to deep waters. Similarly, Bedouin communities are not allowed grazing land for sheep or access to water pumps. Instead, these resources, like water and fish, are redirected to and overconsumed by Israeli settlements. Colonization disrupts indigenous communities' ability to live off their land and to exercise real autonomy and sovereignty. And the key to freedom is complete land sovereignty.
I wanted to preface what you're about to see by saying that the views you will hear don't represent the majority of people who live in Israel. Although that said, there is some reliable polling that suggests that between 25 and 40% of the population here supports some form of settlement inside Gaza. The awful trauma of October the 7th attacks have pushed those figures towards the upper end. Also want to preface it by saying that while we were at this event, a group of protesters showed up outside. They were friends and family of hostages still being kept inside Gaza, and they were scathing about politicians on the right who they perceive are weaponizing the events of October the 7th for political reasons. Blowing bubbles as Gaza burns. This weekend, over 100 people died in the north of the Strip. And as that was happening, not far away in southern Israel, settlers held a two-day event.
This whole area is one big terror cell. It has an infection. You have to take out the infection.
They set out their plans for Jewish outposts inside what will be left of Gaza if they get in. Celebrated the festival of Sukkot as the smell of homes on fire wafted in from the west. We spoke to one of the organizers. What you're about to hear is hate speech. We decided to broadcast it because, as you'll see, these people have some very powerful friends in the Israeli government.
That is when you have a cut in your body, and that cut, it has an infection. You have to take out the infection. When you take out the infection, then it'll be clean again.
In terms of cleaning out this infection, as you call it, what would you like to see happen to the over 1 million Palestinians that live there?
I think there are many nations, including Ireland and England, who would welcome them to come and live in their
mass deportations to other countries.
Yeah, just like happens in Ukraine, in Russia, and any other place in the world you have a war.
Does that idea not offend?
You have refugees.
Does that idea of mass deportations and cleansing the wound not offend your sense of Jewishness, given your people's history?
No, because when the evil is so bad, you have to do something with it to make peace with evil.
Like that has very dark historical resonance. That sentence you've just said. In terms of Jewish people,
right now, the dark I know was what happened a year ago here in Sderot. That was very dark.
That evening at the main event, settler families set up their sukkahs overlooking the Strip. There's been an exponential rise both in the number of settlements and in violence directed by them against Palestinians in the West Bank since the October the 7th attacks. These people see the war in Gaza as the ultimate supplanting of Palestinians there. We meet Danny and Hadar Penton and their children bedding down for the night. They're so committed to the idea of resettling that part of their promised land, they'd bring the children to live in Gaza today. I understand your beliefs and I understand your ideology, but you're not honestly telling me that you would bring your 7 children into a war zone today to live.
אוקיי, כן, אני עושה את זה עכשיו ולא יקרה להם כלום. אלוהים שומר עלינו ואני מאמינה בלב שלם שזאת המשימה שלנו.
Daniela Weiss holds court that evening. She's seen as the grandmother of the modern-day settler movement, and now she's something else as well. Friends with Israel's new far-right settler power elite, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, Minister of National Security, who we'll meet later. They're the settlers' champions, no longer manning outposts, driving ministerial cars. Do you feel like this is your political moment?
It's not a moment. It's the beginning of an era. It's the beginning of a period. It's a big change. The left is losing its rule, and the right came to power, and this is to stay.
The main event the following day, a showcase of political muscle. When Daniela Weiss says this is a new era, this is what she means. Settlers are no longer a fringe group of militant zealots that are irrelevant. They are sharing the stage with government ministers and MPs. This is what real power looks like. May Golan is Minister for Social Equality. She is from Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. She wants all Gazans to leave the Strip. But what of those who don't want to leave? If it ever gets to that point, What's the government's plan?
Well, I'm not talking about plans right now.
So you don't have a plan for that? Just to be clear, you're bombing Gaza, but you do not have a plan to move the people who don't want to leave.
I said one question, but no problem. We're doing, and we will do, everything that we need in order to protect the lives of our people, women that were slaughtered,
no, I get
girls
that. Sorry,
that were
you
kidnapped.
said one question. This is still the same question. What I need to ask you is, do you have a plan? Do you have a plan to move the Gazans who do not want to leave? So you do have a plan.
That just like in your democracy, these people have the right to speak their mind. They have the freedom of speech, and those people that the bomb that you just heard are the monsters that are trying to kill us for the last year. That have slaughtered. That was slaughtered. There's thousands of bombs, and while we're talking, there are rockets at the south and the north of our country.
So you have a plan
you should deal with the
to
fact
move the
that
Gazans
we
who
have
don't want
every
to
right
go,
to protect
but
ourselves
you won't tell us what the plan is.
Tool possible.
Other politicians, the warm-up acts for Ben Gvir. Convicted of terror-related activities as a young man, now Minister for Security. The British government reportedly considered sanctions against him. Ben Gvir, British television, are you worried about British sanctions? Are you worried about British sanctions? Can I quickly ask you also, for the Gazans who don't want to leave, what's your plan for them? For the Gazans who don't want to leave, what is your plan for them? Can I ask you that, sir? Excuse me. British sanctions, no, are you worried? What's your message to the people of Gaza at the moment as they're dying just a few miles from here? Can I ask you that, sir? We left them to the dancing, to the drum and the bass of religious fervour and power. The music echoed across the field. Probably didn't reach northern Gaza, drowned out there by the sounds of something else entirely.
Have you seen this video?
Inside, we found 8 babies burned in this corner.
An Israeli soldier conducts an interview in front of a destroyed home of a kibbutz. He says Hamas fighters burned babies and then beheaded them, but this is all a lie, and I'm going to prove it to you using Israeli media. Yes, that is right, Israeli media. But first, let's ask an important question. How did the concrete walls of this home behind the soldier turn into rubble? Fires burn wood and other flammable items. They do not collapse concrete structures like this.
Children in the same room, then someone come and kills them all. 15 girls and teenagers that put in the same room, 3 hand grenades, and it's over. This is a massacre.
Now, the Israelis want you to believe that Hamas fighters did this, but we know that they were only armed with machine guns and small grenade launchers. That doesn't cause this level of damage. So then how did they destroy concrete homes like this? The answer is they didn't. The Israelis did. What? That is shocking. But why? And how would the Israelis do that? Well, Israeli media has all the answers. They interviewed the IDF soldiers who responded to the Hamas attack, and they learned something shocking. The IDF was struggling to handle the Hamas fighters. Tuval Eskapa, or however you pronounce his name, a member of the security team for Kibbutz Be'eri, set up a hotline to coordinate between kibbutz residents and the Israeli army. He told the Israeli newspaper Haaretz that as desperation began to set in, the commanders in the field made difficult decisions, including shelling houses on their occupants in order to eliminate the terrorists along with the hostages. These reports indicate that orders came down from the military's high command to attack homes and other areas inside Israel, even at the cost of many Israeli lives. According to Haaretz, the army was only able to restore control over Be'eri after admittedly shelling the homes of Israelis who had been taken captive. The price was terrible. At least 112 residents were killed, according to the paper. Others were kidnapped. Now, much of the shelling in Be'eri was carried out by Israeli tank crews. As a reporter for the Israeli Foreign Ministry-sponsored outlet I-24 noted during a visit to Be'eri.
Small and quaint homes bombarded or destroyed. Children's toys lying around, well-maintained lawns of grass ripped up by the tracks of an armored vehicle. Perhaps a tank. Perhaps a tank. Perhaps a tank.
In other words, the IDF, in an act of desperation, decided to just kill everyone, including hostages. This is their words, not mine. In fact, Yasmin Porat, an attendee of the Nova Music Festival, who fled into the kibbutz, told Israeli radio that when Israeli special forces arrived during a hostage standoff, they, quote, eliminated everyone, including the hostages, because there was very, very heavy crossfire.
כי היה שם חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים, חילופי אש מטורפים, אפילו שני פקדים של טנק שירו לתוך הבית, שזה בית קיבוצי קטן, זה לא איזה, רואים את זה בחדשות.
She goes on to describe how Hamas militants tied her partner's hands behind his back. She saw her partner lying on the ground, still alive. She went on to say that Israeli security forces killed him and other hostages as they opened fire on the remaining militants inside, including with tank shells.
ובן הזוג שלך שהיה איתך?
נהרג.
הוא גם נהרג.
כן, כולם נהרגו שם.
This is why you see large bits of shrapnel and bullet holes in the walls of destroyed kibbutz homes. It's why you see homes turn into rubble. And sadly, it's why you find severely burnt bodies of Israeli hostages. But there's more. The IDF also used Apache attack helicopters. In an interview with Israeli media outlet Mako, an Apache pilot admitted that many of the cars he fired rockets at contained hostages. But wait, there's even more. Israeli security forces also opened fire on fleeing Israelis whom they mistook for Hamas gunmen. A resident of Ashkelon named Danielle Rachel described nearly being killed after escaping from the Nova Music Festival when it was attacked by militants. As we reached the roundabout at a kibbutz, we saw Israeli security forces, she recalled. We held our heads down because we automatically knew they'd be suspicious of us in a small beat-up car from the same direction the terrorists were coming. Our forces began shooting at us. Lastly, let's discuss how an IDF commander ordered an airstrike on his own position. The very first target the Palestinian fighters attacked was the Erez checkpoint. The attack was so fierce that the IDF commander, Avi Rosenfeld, in an act of desperation, he called for an airstrike on his own position. The IDF bombed their own base in order to kill the Palestinian militants. So what should we take from all this? Do we absolve Hamas of their actions on October 7th? Of course not. None of this would have happened had they not attacked. Now, whether or not they have the right to resist occupation and apartheid with the use of force is a topic for another video. But the point of this video is to highlight how the IDF's poor response and performance led to the deaths of their own people. As several Israeli hostages have already made clear, the Palestinian militants were kind to them despite the aggression. And as the Nova survivor Yasmin Porat put it, she believes the militants didn't want to kill them. She believes their goal was to take them back to Gaza as hostages. The entire point of the attack seems to be the capturing of Israelis as hostages in order to trade them for thousands of Palestinian political prisoners. And in the chaos that ensued, many people lost their lives. Now, some people say, who cares how it went down? People died. Babies died. Is that not awful? Well, of course it is. But the reason we have to cut through Israeli propaganda is because it's being used to justify acts of genocide in Gaza. Israelis believe deep down to their core that their babies were beheaded and that their women were raped and tortured before being killed. And this simply isn't true. And even with Israeli media reporting the facts, they may never change their minds. But the rest of the world needs to know the truth because it is the world that has given Israel the green light to commit acts of atrocity in Gaza. And there's growing concern of an escalation that may erupt into a greater regional conflict. So share this video and help spread the facts. The world deserves to know the truth. And without you, that'll never happen. RIP to all those who lost their lives, especially the thousands of innocent children in Gaza, incurring the wrath of a misled population. Free Palestine.
An Israeli school field trip showed up. And these children, they're teenagers, they came from 2 hours away to come and watch the genocide. And the first rush of boys to the top of the hill to that observation platform, when they caught sight of Gaza, when they caught sight of the genocide, they pumped their fists and they gave the middle finger to it, and they were very, very excited. And so the idea that there weren't just Israeli citizens who were looking at this, gawking at it, but school children have been brought on a field trip from 2 hours away to come and watch the genocide is just an aspect of what's occurring here that my visceral reaction to it is one that I'm really troubled by and having a hard time to process. What is grotesque and absurd and obscene that I was not expecting was where we went to look at Gaza. We went to an observation platform, Judge. We went to an observation deck, just like you have overlooking Niagara Falls, including with the big binoculars where you put the coins in so you could see. And this is an observation platform that looks into Gaza, an observation platform that observes the genocide. And as we were there looking at Gaza, you don't hear the screams, you don't hear the dying, you don't see the wrecked bodies. You can't even really make out the damaged buildings. But from this observation platform, it's very picturesque. It's as if you're watching